Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to the top 10 nonfiction books tag created by Lukas over at Totally Pretentious. He was kind enough to tag me. He posted this tag yesterday, he posted this tag on Tuesday, which is Tag Tuesday, and one of the few Tag Tuesdays on which I did not do a tag. I put out a review video instead, and so I couldn't rush to get my version of this video made like other people, like Matthew over at Mayberry Book Club, and Steve Donoghue, and Jason from Byways and Bookland, and others who already done the tag. So I thought I would preempt my normal Thursday video, or the video I had ready for Thursday, and instead do this tag because I love reading nonfiction, and I have some books I want to share. So because I read nonfiction and I respond to a lot of tags about top 10 books, some of the books in this are going to be a repeat. And I'm not sure I have them, I'm not really have them in order from 10 to 1, necessarily ranked, but just kind of overall my top 10, even though there is one book here, which is, I'm just going to say, is my absolute favorite nonfiction read. So here we go. I'm just going to go through these 10 nonfiction books relatively quickly and try to go through the ones I think I've mentioned or talked about in some detail before and talk about those more quickly. So starting with the book that I've mentioned several times here on my channel, and that's Spirited Resistance, The North American Indian Struggle for Unity, 1745 to 1815 by Gregory Evans Dowd. This is a book which relies on kind of ethnography of various Native American tribes to explain why some tribes fought, why some groups of Native Americans fought, rebelled against American domination and conquest of their lands, and how that those rebellions were oftentimes led by spiritual leaders and fueled by spiritual beliefs by a group of people who felt like that their last option for preserving their way of life, their culture, their people, their society, was to fight back. That's all that was left, and what unified them oftentimes were their beliefs. I really was moved by this book. It is one of those books which, long ago I accepted that what had happened to Native Americans in the United States was just, flat wrong, but to kind of understand better, based on their own belief systems, why they behaved the way they did, and why they did what they did, and why the actions they took that sometimes to Americans seemed wrong within their own belief system, their own societies, were oftentimes seen as their only options or the right thing to do. Another book I've mentioned several times on my channel, it's one of my favorite nonfiction books, is Gramercy Park, An American Bloomsbury by Carol Klein. This basically traces the cultural significance of the Gramercy Park neighborhood of New York City, and its importance in kind of nurturing and being home to artists and writers and poets and architects. This kind of incredibly creative or creativity inspiring community, which goes from kind of the 1860s up until around World War I, and like I said, it touches on all kinds of things, writers, painters, architects, and this is just the kind of book that I like. I really like cultural history, particularly when it involves creativity and creative communities. So this again is one of my top 10 favorite nonfiction books. Another book I know I've mentioned, which reflects kind of what for a while was a fairly serious interest in learning about Central Africa and what was going on there. One of the most powerful and I think best books of history I've ever read is Adam Hochschild's King Leopold's Ghost. This tells the tragic, horrific story of what happened in what used to be called the Belgian Congo, when King Leopold of Belgium treated the Congo more or less like his personal plantation and exploited the people there for the rubber that could be gotten out of the region, even at the expense of basic ideas of humanity, where the people of Congo were murdered for falling behind on production, were tortured, were mutilated, all for one man's wealth. And this gives you, I think, a really good glimpse into what oftentimes are the overlooked kind of nightmares of European imperialism on the African continent and the long-term devastation that took place. almost in the exact same place, another really powerful book that I read that I recommend to almost everybody in terms of understanding kind of more recent events in Central Africa is this book by Philip Garevich, We Wish to Inform You That Tomorrow We Will Be Killed with Our Families. This is an eyewitness, there's the recording of eyewitness accounts and people who were there in Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide when essentially at the urging of their government, their neighbors turned against the ethnic minority and brutally murdered those people, oftentimes with farm implements and tools that they had around their homes, and just kind of the nightmare situation and the failure of the international community to come to their assistance, to do anything effective to stop the killing, and then also kind of the heroism of the Doctors Without Borders organization, which I believe, hey Zelda, which I believe is pronounced Médecins Sans Frontières. In French, that's my best shot at it, but a really good book. Sorry about the dog interruption there. Apparently, they were ready to go out. So 2 books I don't think I've ever talked about on my channel that are also some of my favorite nonfiction reads. One of them is Longitude by Davis Sobel, which is basically the history of how the longitude problem was solved. And how we figured out how to measure and figure out where we were on the globe, not just latitudinally, but longitudinally, which is a matter of time. And that problem was presented by the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, and a reward was offered to somebody who could solve it. And the observatory expected to be solved through astronomy, through observation, through science. And the guy who actually solved it was essentially a clockmaker named John Harrison, who figured out how to make a clock that you could use on board a ship, a clock that would keep incredibly accurate time, that would compensate, whose action wouldn't be thrown off by the pitch, the roll, the yaw of the ship. And this is just a really good small history about a really specific topic, but oftentimes I find that histories on a really specific topic oftentimes give you background information and insight into all kinds of other things that were going on. Like just kind of the general snobbery between people who consider themselves scientists and people who they consider to be essentially workmen or mechanics. So I really like that book. And then a book I'm almost positive I've never mentioned on my channel. Also, at least in today's list, one of my top 10 nonfiction books is called Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed. This is the story of the village of La Chambon and how goodness happened there. This is a story of how one French village, in part because of the leadership of the Friends Church there, essentially rescued thousands of Jewish adults and children from the Holocaust. Right there, in the village being in kind of plain sight of the Nazis and the Vichy government, how the village came together to stop evil. We think about, and Schindler's List is a great movie, and we think about Oskar Schindler as being one of those people who saved hundreds of Jewish lives during the Holocaust. This was a whole village of people at their own personal risk, choosing to do the right thing, choosing to do the brave thing and the humane thing, and it's a really powerful and good book. I don't think I've mentioned this. I think I've mentioned this book on my channel before, but I don't think I've ever talked about it, and that is this book by Olivia Laing called The Trip to Echo Spring on Writing and Drinkers by Olivia Laing. Olivia Laing probably more famous for The Lonely City, and I think her last book was Crudo, which I don't think anybody here on BookTube is particularly liked, but I really like this book in part, and you're going to see a theme here in the next this book and the next 2. It's because I like reading about writers. Like I said with Gramercy Park, I enjoy nonfiction books that talk about the creative process or creative people, and this book does that. And it explores a topic which I had some interest in, and that is, essentially how do creative people like writers, like Raymond Carver, why is drinking seem to be such a part of what they do? When I was in college, I imagined myself growing up to be a writer. I think I've already mentioned this if you follow my channel at all. You know that for a while I idolized Hemingway in what's probably an unhealthy way. And, I drank quite a bit, almost in the belief that if I said I was a writer and I wrote and I drank, that somehow that would make me a writer. This book, I was disabused of that notion by the age of 25 probably. And this book just kind of covers that same topic and talks about the impact that alcohol had on the lives of a lot of creative people and writers. So I really like that book. That's my favorite Olivia Lang book. And then along the same lines, I also chose today for my one of my top 10 nonfiction books, the Paris Review interviews. These are interviews that the magazine, the Paris Review, did with writers in the 20th century. And it records kind of a conversation with writers in which the interviewer asks them about their books, about their writing style, about questions about their specific writing, and I just enjoy reading those interviews. And even though I'm well aware that the authors here are frequently probably not being entirely truthful, and there's a fair amount of spin involved in their answers, I just love reading writers or listening to writers talk about writing and reading writers' conversations about writing. And then my last favorite nonfiction book that is related to writing is my favorite biography, which is my favorite. It's called Max Perkins, Editor of Genius. This talks about the career and the life of famed Scribner's editor Max Perkins, the editor of Thomas Wolfe and Ernest Hemingway, and F. Scott Fitzgerald, among others, who more or less turned Scribner's in the early half or the first half of the 20th century into a publisher of world-renowned authors and authors who people consider to be very serious writers of the time, no matter what we, Steve Donoghue, may think of them today. And I just love the book about kind of Perkins's methods of editing and how he dealt with the various egos. And he himself and his life and his family was really interesting. But my single favorite nonfiction book is this book about World War I, which is called The Beauty and the Sorrow, An Intimate History of the First World War by Peter England. So this book essentially follows individual people through the years of the war and what was happening to them. And these are sometimes soldiers and sometimes not. These are sometimes just people, housewives, families left behind, and their view of what was going on in the war. So we get to go inside, I believe, Austria with an Austrian family. We do get to be with soldiers, but sometimes soldiers on fronts we don't think about with World War I, like in Africa. We're on the Armenian front during the Armenian massacre, and there's just a lot of firsthand reportage and great history here in this book. And this is one of those books which really humanizes, I think, people from the past and reminds us that these were human beings dealing with a tragedy and a calamity in their everyday life and how they did that. And I highly recommend this book, by the way. If you are a World War I person and you know the history of World War I and you're looking for kind of more of on a personal level understanding of how the war impacted people, this is just a great book and my absolute favorite work of nonfiction. So there you go. There's my top 10 nonfiction book tag answers. Thank you again, Lukas, for tagging me. I'll leave a link to Lukas's version of the video down below. I may link a few of the other fellows and people who've done this tag down below too. As always, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.